So we've saved the most exciting panel discussion today for the time right before happy hour. So we're going to make this a happy panel discussion so we can roll into happy hour. So good afternoon. I'm Alice Bravo. I'm the president and CEO of Alice Bravo and Associates. And in a prior life, I was the director of transportation and public works here for Miami-Dade County. And I'm very excited to have you all here. And our panel today is Reinventing the Supply Chain, Innovation, Sustainability, and Future of Logistics. This is something that affects our lives every day, day in, day out. We may not think about it, but fortunately, there are a lot of brilliant people that do think about it because they deal with a world where time is money, and they're dealing with perishable goods and all types of things where logistics becomes very, very important. And we live in a world where we don't have warehouses stockpiled with things anymore. Everything's just in time delivery. And I think that was exemplified during the pandemic when we had issues getting certain things like toilet paper, right? So I'm just gonna, we have Chris Hudtwalcker. He's the innovation director for the Port of Miami. We have Jack Symington, director of city climate innovation at Los Angeles. And we have Kelly Porter, the assistant director of transportation and public works for city of Fort Worth. And we're gonna have each one of them talk a little bit about what they do and their jobs and the innovations that they're bringing. And then we'll open it up for some questions. And I always like to hear what people are working on, but I also want to hear what's the next generation. So if somebody here in the audience is just getting started, maybe they don't spend time doing what you're doing, but they leapfrog to that next generation. Yeah. So I'll start with Chris.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Hudtwalcker. I'm the Director of Innovation for the Port of Miami. And Alice, your comments about people leapfrogging and going into unexpected paths applies to me perfectly. I first met Alice in my prior life working in politics, actually. And after about 8 years in politics, I transitioned over to the Port of Miami, seeking a new challenge, seeking to learn something deeply, and what cooler than the port, in my opinion. So I came over as a strategy officer working for the strategy team, and we connected with the Miami-Dade Innovation Authority, which was an entity created here with help from Miami-Dade County and Mayor Levine Cava, an outside entity of the county to help county departments identify pain points, challenges that they had, and connect them with potential technology solutions, especially focused in the startup, early stage companies. So I was assigned to lead that project, and as I did, we selected cargo visibility as our topic to focus on. I really pushed for that. Cargo visibility means a lot of things to a lot of people. It could be on the ocean side, it could be in the terminal yard, it could be on the roadways, it could be anywhere. But what we ended up settling on is how do we improve our operations, our visibility into what's happening on port through the use of cutting-edge technology, and that's mostly computer vision and AI technologies. So we're basically taking, with these pilot projects, our existing camera systems, applying computer vision and AI, and gathering insights into what's happening on port. You would think as the Port Authority, we've got all kinds of data, we know what's going on, but in reality, we lease out the cargo yards to private companies who do the actual moving of containers, and we work with our cruise line partners on the cruise side, right? So we actually fly blind on a lot of this stuff, and we're in charge of the infrastructure, we're in charge of the roadways, we're in charge when traffic issues happen on port, they blame us. So this is kind of one of the steps we are taking to get better visibility on what's happening on port, provide metrics, right? Understand how long trucks are on port, which terminals are performing better than others when it comes to efficiency and dwell time and turnaround time. And so that project, we've just kicked off our first pilot. We've got 3 other pilots that are coming as well. Happy to share more details about that if anyone has any questions. And then transitioning, a little bit more broadly, while I was leading that project, I realized that innovation really didn't have a home at the port. And I think it's something you see in a lot of organizations, in the county, any big organization, right? We constantly were being approached by vendors, individual business units were being approached, right? The security team and the environmental team and the operations teams. And these guys and gals are just trying to get through their day-to-day operations, right? They're struggling with the cruise passengers and the traffic and just making their day-to-day, getting through their day-to-day. So they didn't have the capacity, the bandwidth to sit and meet with these vendors, work through the scoping process for a pilot, go through an agreement, basically manage all these projects. I realized this. So my idea, I pitched to the director, and we earlier this year launched the Office of Innovation at the Port of Miami. So basically my role at the port is to provide that extra capacity now to the individual business units at the port. And, over this time, I've been planting seeds all over the place. And it's funny, it's almost like the day that I took the title of Innovation Director, they all came to fruition basically on the same day. It was crazy. From that day, I basically not stopped working. So we're looking at technologies and maintenance, right? How can we apply AI to maintenance for predictive maintenance, failures, things like that? We're looking at how to improve the cruise passenger experience. So how can we make it more comfortable, more enjoyable to come to the Port of Miami through different technologies and ways to make the port engaging and accessible for cruise passengers? We're working with our operations teams around traffic and security and all of those things. And the last piece I'll mention is through this work, I also realized, especially on the cargo side, how fragmented this business is, right? You've got the trucking companies, you've got the cargo yards, the shipping lines, the freight forwarders and brokers, the BCOs, right? The cargo owners, the actual people who own the cargo and are paying for its movement. And then you have us as the Port Authority. All of those entities are using different systems, different software. They're not sharing their data with each other. And there's huge potential in the future if all of these companies and entities would start playing nice and sharing data. Ability for efficiency, for visibility, for appointments, for just making this a more seamless process here at the port. And so what I've pitched, and we're having our first meeting in May, is the PortMiami Supply Chain Innovation Council. So we've brought together all those major stakeholders here in the Miami-Dade area to meet quarterly to talk about what are they working on in innovation and technology, what are they excited about that's coming down the pipeline. And over time, my hope is that this will foster a collaborative environment for these larger projects to kind of organically grow, where folks will let their guard down and we can start working on some big projects some big ambitious projects to make this a better place to bring cargo.
Very excited.
That means I spoke too long.
No, perfect. All right, well, now let's hear from Jack Symington, all the way here from Los Angeles.
Yes, yeah, all the way from Los Angeles. I run Jack Symington, Director of City Climate Innovation at Lacey. We're the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, and we're a 501c3 nonprofit that used to be part of the local water and power utility there, LADWP. And then we're spun out in about 2012 or so to serve a role kind of very similar actually to what Chris was describing of helping cities understand, especially Los Angeles is how it started, understand innovation in the zero-emission transportation and renewable energy and then smart city space. So we do incubate companies. We connect them with investors. We help them kind of grow their business plans. It's often a lot of first-time entrepreneurs from disadvantaged communities often as well. And then as they grow and then they're looking to do pilot projects, that's where my kind of division comes in the company. I work in the market transformation division, which is all about, you can't change energy or transportation without engaging the public sector, but the public sector needs to be able to talk to startups and vice versa. And so we sit kind of in between the two, helping put together some projects that prove out the startup's technology or service and meets what the city's need was. And so we've been doing that in Los Angeles for about 10 years now. And then about a year and change ago, we were talking with cities all over the country who were like, oh, the role you have in the ecosystem in LA is so great. We wish we could kind of have that resource as well. Every city is strapped for time and personnel. And so if you can, this next slide has the, oh, maybe it's right over there. So we launched our City Climate Innovation Challenge, including 6 new cities. We had done something previously with Pittsburgh and Santa Monica, so they were grandfathered in. But all of these cities here, expressed an interest in, working with us. We could provide a procurement hack in a way, as well as the cities, if they wanted to deploy some infrastructure technology in a public right-of-way or have the public sector own it. We would set up an MOU with that city and then contract directly with the technology provider to deploy that on a pilot basis. And so we're really kind of proud of the scope that we have across these cities as well. The stat's not up there, but it's 1 in 6 U.S. citizens are represented by the metro areas of these 9 cities. So there's great reach. We've been working with C40 and climate mayors to develop this initial cohort, and then as we move past the first cohort, which is focused on zero emissions delivery, we'll be having other kind of themes like building electrification or multifamily home passenger charging and the like. And it's all funded through either the federal or philanthropic resources. So last slide is kind of a quick overview of some of those pilots that we are doing. We kind of called micro freight solutions, which is e-bikes or other smaller form factor vehicles to deploy for gig delivery drivers. Zone and curb management is a big one. Miami is focused on that, as is Santa Monica and Pittsburgh. I'll probably talk more about it later. Micro delivery hubs and delivery efficiency is kind of this recognition that if you want EVs and smaller form factor vehicles making the last mile delivery, that last node in the goods movement network needs to be a little bit more closer to the urban center. And so how do you kind of coordinate around that? And then vehicle electrification as well, especially how do you get smaller, less capitalized businesses to deploy an EV, even though it has that higher upfront capital cost. So kind of what are the business and financing models behind getting that equipment into smaller businesses? So yeah, happy to dig in more in a second.
Fantastic. And next, we'll turn it over to Kelly from Fort Worth.
Thank you for having me today. So it's on the way on. So I am with the City of Fort Worth's Transportation and Public Works Department, and I am over the Regional Transportation Innovation Division. Just a bit about Fort Worth. I won't even go on all this. It's about the same size as Dade County. It's not really 4.1 million. It's about 3 million in Fort Worth around it, and then another 8 million. So we are growing. I think one of our big stories is we're growing rapidly. About 20,000 people each year move to the city, with another 30,000 to our suburbs and to the greater Dallas-Fort Worth area. I think last year it was about 107,000 people moved there in a year. So rapid growth, which also means rapid thoughts on how we need to think about our supply chains and really, from my perspective, working in transportation, the supply of space on my roads as well. And so we're thinking about how do we toggle those things together. You go to the next slide. So some ways we're thinking about this is call them smart corridors, but we're really thinking about it more so as call them hot corridors, because smart corridors seems like that's been done a million times. So hub of technology corridors is what we're going for, that integrate a whole host of things in here, including land use and multiple modes. But part of what we want to think about with modes is not just moving people, but also moving goods. So we're also thinking about micromobility from an urban freight standpoint. Something we do have to ask ourselves, do big trucks belong in the cities in the same way that they had for years? And so this gives us an opportunity to think a bit differently about that. So we're mixing hard capital projects, such as like rebuilding a road or expanding a road, with multimodal options, and then we're also including form-based code with those, so we can get the type of places that we want, and then also of course, fiber is no longer a luxury. It's actually kind of a public utility, just as with these other options. And we need to also be thinking about urban freight as part of this as well. So one thing that we're doing on these corridors with our multimodal infrastructure, we're thinking about our bicycle infrastructure infrastructure that's been traditionally thought about exclusively for bicycles as being for a whole host of micromobility, including, of course, the scooters and e-bikes, but also thinking about urban freight, like little vehicles that you see out there. In addition to that, and that may actually help us be able to invest more in that type of infrastructure going forward. You go to the next slide. So some of our bigger things, so I have to worry about people getting goods to their houses and curb space management, but we're also thinking about other big things like how do goods actually get into our city and the region. Kind of goes back to that whole, do trucks belong in the city in the same way? So some things we've been working on are really, it's a smart port project. We've got kind of 3 different things going on in this area right now. We've got one, which is an autonomous vehicle truck port. We're putting on the interstate there that's going to be serviced by our managed lanes. And so the goal is put them on the interstate. We needed truck parking anyway, but can we use the managed lanes as facilities also for that last few miles into our inland port to be able to platoon vehicles from the ports? Their Alliance Airports, at least at one point in time, was the only publicly owned exclusive freight airport in the country. It's still a major driving factor for us economically. But with that there and our Burlington Northern Santa Fe terminal there, it creates really opportunities for a lot of moving goods across different modes. So think about multimodality also in the freight standpoint. In addition to that, we've received some federal funding, so not only for the truck port, but also for direct connectors. It's actually going to our COG, which is going to build direct connectors from the interstate lanes directly onto a stretch of road there called Intermodal Parkway, which goes into our BNSF terminal, where we're actually going to be platooning autonomous trucks. We're working with a company called Cavnu out of Michigan, and they're going to be building out dedicated truck lanes on that corridor that'll connect directly to our state highway system. And then on the next slide, we're also deploying what we're calling, it's through a SMART grant, and that's why we came here last year, a USDOT SMART grant. So we had a build grant, not a build grant, what was it called? Infra grant. And then a SMART grant in addition to that, that's built out a system of weather sensors there so we can help with if you've ever been to the plains, the weather can change in a heartbeat. And so this is actually going to help us maintain, hopefully, a safer system and a more predictable system for our potential urban air mobility, which is now starting to get traction in the Metroplex, as well as things running on the surface as well. So we're thinking about this in a more integrated way, not only from kind of to Chris's point on the getting goods into our region and into the country, but also thinking about how do we get them to actually people's homes as well.
So you're all grappling with a lot of different issues and a lot of different players. So I have some questions for each of you, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. And Chris, I love this idea of this group that you've pulled together, and something that's discussed a lot here in Miami. I don't know if you're dealing with this, but our congestion on our streets and what deliveries and everything, the impact that they have on that. And there's been a lot of discussion about, maybe we should have a 24-hour port, and then that way the cargo vehicles could move on off hours and reduce the traffic on the roads. Could you tell us a little bit about what's happening with that?
Yeah, sure. So it's funny. I actually had a conversation with one of our cargo yards today about this, right? So it's a huge issue, right? Normally, for the most part, ports around the country are not placed in the center of a giant metropolitan area, right? It doesn't usually make sense to do that. In this case, that's just how Miami developed. We are an island in the middle of downtown Miami. We are land constrained, obviously, by the water on all sides. And we have two routes in and out. We have a tunnel, and we have a bridge that goes through downtown. We did open the bridge in 2015, which is an almost $1 billion investment. Alice knows very well about that project, which is the Port of Miami Tunnel, an incredible feat of engineering, and I mean, I'm always impressed by that project. It's incredible. They took
People doubted it could be done.
well, and it took a long time, right? I mean, they brought specialized equipment, a boring machine from France, drilled under the water to build a tunnel through Miami. So it's incredible. That was huge because that took all those cargo trucks off of downtown streets. Can you imagine all of the cargo trucks, right? Even before we really started having a movement towards sustainability and emissions and things like that, just belching fuel and emissions through downtown Miami. All the cruise passengers, the tens of thousands of cruise passengers that come to the port on a given day, all through the streets of downtown Miami where you are right now.
Miami World Center was made possible because the tunnel took all the truck traffic off the streets.
Yeah. No, it's incredible. It's a huge feat. So that's one of the big strides that we've taken to resolve that. But to Alice's point, it's interesting. We are a tough place when it comes to this. We have cultural things, and not cultural in from different countries or anything. It's just a Miami cultural thing that we deal with. It's an established pattern, right? They work from certain hours. The 24-hour port is not something that truck drivers and even the warehousing districts and everything are not accustomed to. So that is an effort that we are beginning to undertake now, because you can't have every single truck driver trying to get to the port at 6 a.m. and trying to be off the port by 2 p.m. It just doesn't work, right? Those happen to coincide with cruise traffic, and it happens to coincide with commuter traffic. So that's an effort we're beginning. And actually, when we were talking about the supply chain council to one of the cargo yards today, he actually asked me if we could bring up this issue of 24-hour traffic at the council. Because he's excited. Finally, we have a venue where we have all the players at one table where we can talk about these big issues. So that's one of the things that we're excited about when it comes to that issue.
Fantastic. I'm glad there's hope. Jack?
Well, it's somewhat relatedly, in New York and Los Angeles, New York has been prioritizing it first, but off-hour deliveries, so even if it's not the port cargo traffic, but if you're in downtown Los Angeles or Santa Monica or downtown New York, Manhattan, these large vehicles just gum up the roads. They're a safety hazard, they're a congestion problem, they're idling and emissions. So both New York and Los Angeles are looking at these off-peak delivery programs. So how do you incentivize people to be using the roads at 1 or 2 a.m. During the week, at least, when there are fewer people on the streets.
And I would just add quickly, I mean, there's benefit to them too, right? To the truck drivers. They're not stuck in traffic. They could do 2 turns, 3 turns, which means they get paid more. So it's an education process that we're going to be beginning. Some places are further along than us, but it's something we definitely need to work on.
Absolutely. So Jack, Los Angeles obviously leads the nation in terms of zero emissions and conversions of fleets. Could you tell us a little bit in the shipping freight industry, how is that incentivized and what your group is doing to that end?
Yeah.
And particularly as it relates to the Olympics. I know there are goals tied with that.
Sure. So we, as an organization, we set a lot of, we have LA Metro, which is a local transportation authority, the port, the city, the county, the utilities as part of the leadership group of our nonprofit, and we set some pretty ambitious goals to reach for zero emission deployment by 2028. 30% of all cars on the road, 80% of new sales. One big one was 40% of all port traffic from the drayage trucks to be zero emission by 2028, which it comes out to, depending on how you want to count it, like 6,000 to 8,000 trucks. They're expensive. The state of California does fund it pretty generously at times, but what has really unlocked it is more local funding, and that is something that is we see as a theme across a lot of these, is that cities do have a lot of control and can extract some value to then invest in their own priorities. And so the Port of LA and Long Beach have what's called a clean truck fee, which is for every container pulled by a combustion engine truck, they pay a $10 surcharge. Shippers will complain about that and say it'll drive business away. it's 0.1% of a container, depending on the time of year. So it's a pretty marginal cost, but it has funded, Port of LA and Long Beach do millions of TEUs a year. And so it has funded about 20 to 40 million a year in money that is going to subsidize the purchase of trucks for fleets, EV trucks for fleets, as well as the infrastructure that can support that. So a lot of it has gone into on-site infrastructure. Port of LA, Long Beach are a little bit more fortunate. There is a good amount of land there, and so they're able to dedicate port-owned property to charging infrastructure that is operated by a third party on a concession basis, but they will subsidize some of that upfront cost with this money. And so that's been really the primary driver of it. I think there are close to 1,000 trucks in the registry right now for zero-emission trucks in the registry right now. So it is working. Obviously, as more zero-emission trucks get in, there's less revenue collected. So it'll plateau at some point, but we're pretty pleased with it so far. And I failed to mention when I started, I started in Los Angeles actually working at BYD Motors, which is a manufacturer of electric vehicles, trucks, buses, cars, forklifts, yard hostlers, and in the truck division. So I was working with the port pretty consistently as that rule got developed. And then when I moved over to Lacey, was able to kind of continue that advocacy around what should be the funding priorities given the balance between the need to have infrastructure to support the trucks, but then also trucks to make the infrastructure a profitable investment with enough utilization.
Very, very innovative. Kelly, I love the map of the city with everything that you're doing as an integrated plan, and you mentioned an inland port. For years, that's been discussed here for South Florida. Could you tell us a little bit about the benefits of the inland port and how it, pros and cons of it?
Yeah, sure. It was. We have a pretty strategic location in the center of the continent, and so it started with good planning. 1988 is when Alliance Airport went in, and since then, Burlington Northern's put major investment into a multimodal hub, meaning really their rail traffic's there. But it allows us to kind of do things, and I'd say what you saw on the map is all within Fort Worth for the most part. There's one suburb that's a piece of the inland port, but it's let us kind of think through, as you're talking about drayage, kind of getting things from rail side over to an air side pretty easily, onto the road easily. One thing we're working on now is a heavy freight area in that, to where if we don't expect a ton of users, but at least a couple, that for typical freight that would not be allowed on our city streets because it's too heavy, it can stay within a certain zone and be able to be moved around. So it provides some degree of economic opportunity, but also provides us that flexibility for multimodalism. So with the interstates, with the rail, especially on the rail side, we've actually got really good connections to the ports at Corpus Christi and Houston as well, to where in some cases things can come directly off a ship and then come up the train and then be airlifted someplace or something like that. So it's actually had a true statewide benefit, in addition to being a major economic generator around the area. Now, because we are growing so fast, that used to be the country. It used to just be the airport and a few things out there. Now we've got rapid development around there. And then I think with Chris's point, you kind of brought up your ports in the middle of downtown. Well, the city kind of went that way. And so now we're kind of dealing with some of those conflicts and having to grow up really fast with it. I'd say something else that's unique about our port area is that the roads and the airport are owned by the city, but much of that development that we would generally think of as being run by like a port authority is really all through a private developer that's doing a lot of these other things, and the railroad's private. Of course, the air operators are private. So it's a bit of a different model, comes with some advantages. Of course, there comes with other things that we have to contend with, but I do think it's really helped us, number one, not forget that freight's an important part of our system. Number two, be able to tell multimodalism from a different perspective, a freight perspective versus just kind of a personal trip perspective. And then I also think, the third piece is that, it's just been this major economic engine that's in many ways kept, the city of Fort Worth and the greater part of our region, really, I think, economically sustainable going longer term, but it's helping us think outside the box on so many things. And, you know, when you appeal to people's consumerism and let them know, you know, for every ship that comes into port, or every air cargo that comes into our airport, or specifically every rail vehicle on the trains is not a vehicle on our roadways. And so it does help us tell the story a whole lot better about how these different pieces work.
So Chris, we live in a world where technology is changing very, very quickly. I come from a transportation background. We used to work on 20-year plans, but it's hard to know what we're going to be talking about in 2 or 3 years. So in terms of the freight world and the technologies or trends in the port world, what can we expect in the future based on what you're seeing?
Yeah. Well, you know, everybody knows right now the buzzword is AI, right? And it's funny, I'm actually, my role is director of innovation, but I can be a tech skeptic, right? Because we get hit with so many vendors that are just giving us a generic, you know, vague product. AI this, you know, they want to automate everything. And what I've found a lot is a lot of these issues are not a technology problem, right? It's a people problem or a process problem. So we've tried to separate what is a people or process challenge that we can address in a different way versus just plugging an AI solution into something, right? So that's part of it. But I do believe that this is where we are going. AI absolutely is demonstrating for me use cases at the port, interpreting large sets of data, applying analytics to it, predictive capabilities as well, providing insights to us. I do think that's where we're headed. And so that obviously is, you know, I have to mention. I do think, like I mentioned, the computer vision stuff, I think, and historically for a while now, we've been on physical tags, physical equipment, right? RFID tags, things like that. I think that is going to go away with computer vision, right? All you need is a camera system, and all of a sudden you can do a lot of those things that we were doing with physical equipment. Obviously, I think regardless of administration, I do think that we are still going to push in the direction of green energy. I think that train has kind of just left the station, and whether the administration's pushing for it or not, I do think companies are going to continue to go that way. It's more efficient. We're seeing it's cheaper on maintenance, right? The engines aren't rattling, right? You're able to save on maintenance over the long term. Yeah, we have to invest in charging infrastructure for equipment and things like that. But I think that's going to continue to happen. And then green energy even on the ships, right? Now that's a little more interesting. From what I've seen and what I've heard, it looks like that's going to end up being more of a mix, right? I think we're all kind of expecting, are the ships going to go hydrogen or, you know, electric hydrogen or whatever? I think it's going to end up being more of a mix. Certain fuels for long trips, different fuel mix for shorter trips. So those are trends. And that's interesting, right? Because if you have a certain technology, you have to have it on both sides of that chain, right? Both sides of where that ship is going. So that's kind of a limiting factor as well on the trends. And then an issue that I don't even begin to understand, but I'm trying to, is quantum, right? So heading in the space of quantum where you can do things faster, more accurately, you can do processes computationally that even exponentially more powerful than what AI can do, right? So I do know that we're headed in that direction as well. So those are some of the trends I think we're seeing. But overall, stepping back from technology, I have seen a lot of momentum and energy around what I'm talking about with this collaborative energy, right? I think in the past, it hasn't been that way. But in the past couple years, we really have seen our terminal operators, our partners, have more openness to sharing data and information than we've ever seen before. And that's going to end up being positive for everybody because it means more efficient process, it means cheaper prices, it means quicker delivery. And so those are the ways that a better, more efficient supply chain impacts your day-to-day.
So Jack, and given your experience dealing with different cities, what advice would you give? What is a smart investment for a city to do to help prepare or anticipate what you're working on?
Yeah, sure. So some of the advice I would give, I guess, is that the city has a lot of assets that that private sector players kind of want access to, and they're like really demand inelastic for it. And so I'm thinking of like curb space. Cities could get a lot more money if they structured a program accordingly to like charge for access to commercial loading zones. I was just talking with Kelly about like bike lanes, especially in Los Angeles and New York. A lot of the major parcel delivery companies are really interested in using bike lanes for smaller form factor vehicles instead of big vans on the streets. But there's a tension there, private benefits for what's a public asset. But if the private company is willing to kind of pay for access to that, and the public sector is then transparent about how that money improves infrastructure developments elsewhere, expands the network, and so you can show that yes, like we are charging the private sector for use of this asset, and then we are reinvesting that into better mobility solutions for the whole city. So that applies to bike lane assets. That applies to like curbside loading zones. It's kind of relevant to the clean truck fee I mentioned as well. Like shippers need to move goods through the port of LA and Long Beach. Like there's some discretionary cargo you could say, but like a lot of it coming from Asia, if it still comes from Asia, will have to go through LA Long Beach. And so you can get away with adding this fee that then improves the emissions profile and that benefits everyone in the region through cleaner air. So I think there's probably some example. The micro delivery hubs is another one. There's a lot of underutilized commercial space in cities, and the parcel delivery companies are keen to like figure out, can we do some sort of micro fulfillment center there? Yeah, you don't want lots of trucks coming in and out, and it might not be as aesthetically pleasing, but if you can make it work, those companies will pay for it. So Portland, Oregon is using a public parking lot that was I think formerly for city employees, but not as many city employees come into the office. The parking lot is underutilized. They are going to turn it into a little micro delivery hub, at least on a pilot basis, and get revenue from it and improve the supply chain. So yeah, thinking about how city assets, you can get more money for them. You can get more bang for the buck out of them.
Great. All right. Kelly, what is moving a million, and why is it important?
Great. That's our city's first ever transportation master plan and program. So we've got like an active transportation plan, we've got a thoroughfare plan, but we've never actually just had a fully integrated plan that integrates transit and technology and freight into one document that not only helps us, plan for the future, but also leverage various resources and also just get people thinking about other things. Because notice I didn't say a freight plan, that a lot of times would be through that. It also allows us to do some things where, Jack was talking a bit about curb space, start to think about, instead of just calling it parking, thinking about curb space in a different way, which may seem like, okay, thanks for catching up to us in 2025, but when you're dealing with the rapid growth that we've been dealing with, that's a lot of what our eyes have been on. So this is a document that's going to help us hopefully get our act together when it comes to planning out what our city becomes in the future, both in the short term and in the long term, building out that capital plan. And not only that, we're also updating all of our, policies with this as our subdivision codes and our transportation engineering manual. It'll help really hopefully provide a data-driven approach for us to be able to think smart about our investments and what kind of city we want to be in the future. Because right now we're kind of on this great kick of growth, but there's a difference between just growing to grow versus developing, becoming better over time. And I think from more mature areas like LA and Miami, who didn't necessarily grow too far ahead of us, but just far enough ahead of us, we can learn from them as we continue to go forth. And so I think that's a lot of what our master transportation plan will do. And it kind of goes back to a lot of what Jack said too, about anytime we can monetize something and that keeps our tax rate lower, that's a big thing in my hometown and something we're all feeling. If you've paid property taxes in Texas, you'll understand that. That we have to be able to do that in order to be competitive in the future and provide quality of life, the same level of services. So planning is really, really, really important, and being able to understand the city almost from a business case is going to be incredibly important. A lot of that's going to be working more closely with our private sector and coming up with better partnerships, such as, micro freight hubs, or, thinking about our truck port and how do we monetize certain services there. How do you, permit things and get enterprise fund from that or whatnot. So funding is going to be a big deal, especially with the framework we're kind of dealing with in Texas, whether it's our state government wanting a little bit smaller government or what's happening in DC.
Sounds like you have amazing comprehensive planning efforts. If you failed to plan, you plan to fail, right? So
That's right.
You're on top of it. All right, I want to open it up in case anybody has any questions. We have a few minutes left.
Yeah, I want to address the curb use metmanagement of your assets. Right, it's something that's really important. I'm with DART, by the way, so good to see a fellow Metroplex North Texan here. Can you provide any kind of a maybe case study or use case that's happening right now there we go, that really helps to monetize that? Because I'm thinking, I've heard about this for a little while now. So one thing I am concerned about is large companies, USPS, and the kind of monopolizing this space, or obviously they're in cities all over the world, right? So I could see where you might push out your competitors just based on how that's managed or not. Is it time-based? Any thoughts, innovative thoughts around really what that means from what then you can capture for the city to then put back into infrastructure? So thanks. I hope that was clear.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to kind of follow up to provide a lot more details. The one that really comes to mind is one of our companies, portfolio companies, Automotus, who's been doing a project in Pittsburgh for over a year now, and they have a lot of good data there that I'd be happy to share. Don't know off the top of my head, but from that question of how do you monopolize, how do you prevent some of the bigger players from monopolizing the space, they structured it where you need to register for a permit to access those loading zones, but you can't reserve space ahead of time. So it can't be oh, it's 25 an hour, and then UPS is well, I'm going to buy 20 hours, and no one else will be able to access it. It's just that you register your vehicles using computer vision to ID the license plate. Then you're registered in the DMV, and you pull in, and if you aren't permitted, you get a really big ticket. If you are permitted, you just get charged $10 an hour, or I don't know the number, for as long as you're there. So that was how they structured it that way. I'm not aware of any kind of reservation-based system, because I could see the issues that could come from that if you just have someone monopolize it. But that was how they structured it in Pittsburgh, and I think it's working well. I think it was $80K a month was what they were pulling down.
It's a start. Sorry. Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Stephen Colquitt. I would say we are the development community for UAM here. I work with Aero Auto along with a consortium of companies. I just had a really quick question for you. The company out of France that worked on the tunnel there, do you still have a working relationship with them, and do you expect to do other projects with them?
I'll pass that one to Alice.
So the company was named Bouygues, and they stayed in the area, and they actually helped build some private developments. They're big in North America in terms of infrastructure projects.
Okay.
And basically, they helped form a consortium that was a design, build, finance, operate, maintain contract, P3. So their consortium not only had to design and build the tunnel, but they also have to operate and maintain for 30 years. And their payment scheme is such that their payment is reduced if the tunnel isn't open all the hours it's supposed to open. So that helped ensure quality at the beginning.
And I'm sure Alice can connect you if that's what you're looking for.
We're already in talks with you guys. Yeah, support, yeah. Thanks, though.
Well, I think this has been a great panel. My microphone down. All right, well, great discussion, great insight, and I really appreciate all of you participating, and I appreciate what you're doing to help bridge the gap between where we are and where we want to be with technology. So thank you all. Thank you all for coming.